Good evening. This is my active audience for the remainder of this speech video, and if you would gladly hold this video for me. Alright, basically this is my last and final speech for my public speaking class at Dawson Community College. My name is Wade Lyons, and I am doing a call to action speech on basically anti-statism, getting rid of our state authorities over our individual lives. The main thing I'm wanting to bring up to point is the fact that one of my audience members is indeed one of my sources for this. She has brought a lot of information. She's actually the one holding the camera. And I'm personally doing, pros and cons of the reason why we should not be living in a state-controlled society based on any individual county, parish, basically anything that state can designate as an individual place within all 50 states, continental or non-continental. Well, basically, the beginning of my idea that I thought about when thinking about this was the abolishment of the entire government. I can't say that I'm an anarchist, but I'm a libertarian. I personally am not a big fan of people telling me what to do or telling me that I can't do something simply because they are in power and say that I can't. Well, after a quick revision of my teacher, I reluctantly decided to do a more condensed version, which is going to be obviously anti-statism, which takes the entire thought of going anti-government, which can go countrywide, possibly continent-wide, all the way down to statism, in which case I live in a small, or in a very rather large state of Montana, but in a very small town of Lewistown. Well, there's not much to go on here, but unfortunately when it comes down to Lewistown, we have a very big governmental authority problem. You can do basically anything you want to your house without having any sort of licenses or regulations on you, but you don't have to worry about, I don't know, taking care of your baby up to a certain point. They will tell you that you can, or what you can or cannot do to take care of yourself. Such as, for instance, you can medicinally smoke marijuana in the state of Montana. I myself know that because I personally am a medicinal user. I just recently got in the military, and I chose that to try to use for my medical problems. But to use it recreationally, just to use it, for the good feeling of it, our state does not allow. Well, my only problem is, why on earth shouldn't we be able to be allowed to use a plant that naturally grows here? Yes, you can force it, you can make it grow in a pot or whatever on your plot of land, but you can't use it unless you're specifically a provider or you're your own medicinal user. That to me isn't right. Why should we not be able to use a plant that naturally grows on our earth? Well, that's just one little aspect amongst a plethora of ideas that our state controls, and that I really don't enjoy. Well, a giant pro to the government is, yes, things do get done. So, for instance, giant weather event happens, tornado happens, which hasn't happened for a long time in Lewistown, as a matter of fact. But irregardless, weather happens, and say a tree falls down, or the road gets cracked, or something bad that makes the daily commute to work impossible or very difficult. So, what does the state do? We hire a company, and we get people in, and we construct the road, we take off the tree, we do something, but it's through the state. Yes, they do stuff, mostly because we as the general society of any individual town don't enjoy having to do it ourselves when we're trying to do our daily living. So yes, we ask the state to remove, reconstruct, redo. That does help, to an extent. Not to the greatest extent, but it still happens. The next thing on my pros list I can really think of is basically the idea that in certain individual places, i.e. like places such as Lewistown, our educational system is actually pretty decent, but once again, it's not great. It's not at a really great level. I myself am a personal graduate of our local high school, Fergus High School, and I can tell you right now, yes, I received a decent education. If it weren't for the fact that I was told I had to be in certain classes, I wouldn't be interested in some of the things I'm interested in today, i.e. history. I'm not good at history. But guess what? Now that I know about how to research amongst history, I'm very good about researching historical things that I'm interested in, i.e., the history of the combustion engine. I'm very interested in engineering, and I wouldn't have started if I hadn't been in that school, in my perspective. Yes, that's only one perspective, but it's my perspective, and it's a simple speech video explaining that. Wouldn't make sense? I can also say, when it comes down to that pro, if it weren't for the fact that I hadn't been in school that was regulated by our town, I probably would have been a little bit more of a shut-in due to my personality. Yes, I'm somewhat of a social butterfly. I know how to just speak to get out of awkward situations. But personally, if it weren't for the fact that I had to go to this school to graduate in order to do bigger, better things in life, the mass majority of states understand that in order to go to school to graduate, you'll be accepted into society as a general worker. Yes, there are a lot of workers who have their GEDs or just haven't, plain and simple, haven't graduated, but those are just a few small statistics out of the mass majority. That's only one pro that I can really think of right there, but it's still a pro, irregardless. Now, unfortunately, those are the two main ones I can really think of. So my biggest thing is, why am I doing this speech? Because I'm doing the con side of statism. Plain and simple, what's the downside of doing statism? You're giving all the power from the individual people, such as yourselves in the audience and myself, to one person or just a few small bunches of people who in fact aren't living here, aren't doing our stuff in our daily lives, but they're telling us that we can't help fix our own street with our own money. If I have a pothole sitting in front of my house and I don't want to have to ram it each time I'm driving my truck over it, I think it should be within my power and my right as an individual citizen, not only the United States of America, but as of Lewistown, Montana, specifically at the house I live in, that I should be able to go outside, see a pothole, buy a bag of quick concrete mix, mix it a little bit with some water, and pour it in there. Yeah, it's not perfect, but guess what? It's still my property. So why on earth is about a good 20-30 foot chunk of earth that's being covered by a bunch of concrete being controlled by the state? I don't think that's right. And that's the reason why, as one of my sources and a great friend of mine, as an active audience member, the one that is holding my camera tonight, has brought up a really great idea to me that I would love to try, just to be able to see if it would actually make lives better, which turns out in a couple places it actually has. Instead of sectioning off giant town into big blocks and chopping them up into little sections, basically giving yourself maybe 7 or 8 squares on one individual square of a block inside of a city, you have yourself instead maybe 4 or 5, maybe 6 max on each individual block. This way, you not only have bigger yards to be able to live your life and treat your animals, treat your children, treat yourself, but additionally, you're not being so crammed and compacted into one small zone, so that if anything cracks down or breaks, you don't have to worry about your entire house collapsing in. Instead, if you really needed to, you can build a shed and live in that for the night while you make the repairs. Most places here don't have that capability. So, as a reasonable conclusion, a bigger city area for your own individual house of your own individual owned lot would be so much more feasible. And quite honestly, the idea of starting a town with a simple manufacturing company and people came to work there and decided to live there in the process could make this happen. It was an obvious suggestion made by my audience member, which I greatly appreciate. And then also the idea is living on city water. Basically, actually, any utility in general, actually. There should be no control over our individual utilities, and yet they are. They're not owned by private corporations or even private entities in general. They're owned by the city or the state, and the state controls how much we're not only how much we are to be charged, but how much for a package deal that we are going to be allotted. So if you wanted to, say, get internet for the day, you'd have, or internet for the month, you pay just random out of the top bucket of my thoughts. $50 for a month of internet, but you get only up to 150 gigs, for instance, and you only use, say, 25 gigs, but that's their lowest package. They're charging you $50 to use so much less. Why is that? Why can't you pay for what you're using, not pay for a giant amount as the smallest package they have to offer? And that's just one example. There are actually several that I've heard all over town, being the fact that I own my own business within town. But going on to this next utilities are water and electricity. Here's a pretty big example of the reason why I cannot stand the state and knowing what they have, what power they feel they have over us. Being in the house that I live in, I live right next to a creek. Free-flowing water right next to my house. And yet, I'm connected to the city water. I'm paying roughly between $20 and $60 a month, depending on just how much I use, but I'm still paying for water to come to my house so that I can use and make sure that those pipes underneath my house connected to everything don't rust and shatter when I have a completely usable creek next to my house. But because it's city water, I'm not allowed to use it. Why not? It's literally running water off of a mountain that freely flows down, is naturally filtered by the land it's surrounded by, and just comes by my house. Yes, people can go up there and do all sorts of crap to it, put all sorts of stuff in it, but it still comes out filtered because the land naturally does that. So why on earth should I have to pay for a city to allow me water when I have this abundant source that is naturally filtered? It doesn't make so much sense to me. That, and as I've been doing research over my schooling that I have been attending, I've had plenty of findings in a certain gentleman named Nikola Tesla. Gentleman was a genius. He was able to find out that you can have an abundant source of electricity for free. I mean, technically it's not free because you're going to have to purchase the parts to make the contraption, but it still applies to the fact that you should have free-flowing energy in your own humble abode. But you're not allowed because you have to pay for the state to let you use a company to power your house. And they're overcharging, quite honestly. Did you know that, in fact, any other country, most countries are actually allowed, for an absolute fact, to have a rough, I guess you could say a gas composite underneath or near your house? The Japanese have been doing it for years. China has been doing it for centuries. China is actually very much known for its farmers going into their own individual huts, throwing down scraps into a hole where they have a very feasible pig in there, or a hog, depending on who's owning it, eating up all this scrap, pooping everywhere, and this poop turns into, well, gas. And this gas, yes, is deadly, is very combustible. Well, if these guys can use a combustible gas to power up their combustion engines, or even like an oven, why can't we? But of course, there are too many regulations on it, and if everyone tried it, then eventually we just shut down the giant corporate entity of the electric company that also controls our gas. That to me is wrong. So yes, I'm not a big fan of statism. Not to mention, a very big one that I have had issues with for years is being able to come up with political decisions over minor problems. So for instance, we have senators, we have governors, we have a bunch of government entities, authorities, figures that basically have more power than us because they have a title written on a piece of paper that suggests that they're higher than us. Yet what do they do more than us? They talk to people. That's really all they do. They sign paperwork and they talk to people. So, sorry. Perfectly fine. Happens.
No, my hand fell asleep.
All good.
Sorry about that.
But as a rough conclusion and thought process to all this, we are letting people that decide to put themselves out there in power when we don't have to. We should be taking this power back to ourselves and doing what we want in our own lives. As a very famous quote that I'm pretty sure most of you know, every human has the right to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. why shouldn't we be able to pursue any of that without somebody telling us what to do or how to do it? And that's basically the conclusion of what I feel is best to do in our world with anti-statism. Thank you all very much, and I do apologize for the length of my speech. Good to go.
Just press stop, I guess.